I'm so excited about this afternoon. There's a saying that there are talkers, watchers, and doers. And it is the doers who change the world. Without any doubt, our guest today is a doer. I am both humbled and very honored to introduce Father Greg Boyle, our latest speaker in our State Attorney Speaker Series and our very first since the pandemic. Father Greg travels the world to speak, and we were really fortunate. He agreed to travel across the country to come visit us. I asked him just a few minutes ago why he said yes to our speaking request, and he said he's apparently very bad at saying no. So I'm grateful also to every single one of you who took time today to join us. I know coming downtown is not easy, getting in the building is not easy. Thanks to our team who did everything that they could to make it as convenient as possible. Joining Father Greg today to kick off his talk are Isaac Gonzalez and Louis Pham, both who took their first flight on this trip. They will share their stories today with us. Before we began, I was telling Louis and Isaac that among us here today are Catholic and Episcopalian priests, prosecutors, public defenders, law enforcement officers, state and federal judges, elected officials, local nonprofits, my mom and dad, and philanthropists. Significantly, we're also joined today by some members of our own community who are working here locally to provide jobs, security, and opportunity to the formerly incarcerated Kevin Gay of Operation New Hope, to survivors of sex trafficking, Kristen Keene of Reef Road, and to our own gang-involved men and women in our city, Farland Scott and Chief T.K. Waters of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. Father Greg is a Jesuit priest who has devoted his life to inspiring hope and changing lives. In 1986, he became pastor of the Dolores Mission Church, which was the poorest Catholic parish in all of Los Angeles. The parish included the two largest public housing projects west of the Mississippi, and it also suffered the highest concentration of gang activity in all of LA, which, as his website explains, was saying something given that at that time, LA was known as the gang capital of the entire world. In response to the violence and trauma that surrounded him and his church, Father Greg ultimately founded Homeboy Industries. Homeboy Industries employs and trains former gang members and felons in a series of businesses, including a bakery and a restaurant. This program provides on-the-job training, social service programs, tattoo removal, and most importantly, hope. Hope to break the silent cycle of gang violence for good. Father Greg has said that gang violence is about the lethal absence of hope. Today we're going to watch a short video that captures the hope of Homeboy Industries.
My name is Miguel. I'm head of security, community relations, and there's no place like Homeboys.
My name is X-Cam. I'm a operations supervisor at Homeboy Electronics Recycling.
My name is Marvin Kelly. I've been there 10 years now. I'm the manager of tattoo removal.
My name is Inez Salcido. I went through the 18-month program, and I am now the substance abuse case manager at Homeboy Industries.
Homeboy's success certainly is based on that we have grown many leaders from within the organization.
After 2 tries in prison, that life wasn't for me, and I wanted to change. My mutual friend told me, hey, come down to Homeboys and you might be able to get a job.
I was at a dark place in my life. My family wanted me to get right. I wanted to get right.
When I was in prison, I always thought nobody was advocating for us. So a lot of people in prison, we're just a number. They could judge us whatever way they want, but once they get to know us, they get to know the real us.
Every person that comes in that door is treated with love and kinship and compassion.
We come from broken homes. We come from the streets. When we come to Homeboys, we're here to offer something completely different than what we're used to. You know, we offer the love, the compassion, the unconditional love that we don't get when we're out in the streets.
It's more about relationships with every single homie that walks in through the doors.
We were those people coming in. They see us like, you know, we're bettering ourselves. They want to come be a part of the family too.
Doing security at Homeboys, you kind of become a therapist, a navigator, a case manager, a friend.
It's an opportunity to give back, to work with individuals, be able to try to show them the right way of how to conduct yourself, being accountable, showing up on time. If you don't know these simple stuff, like, man, you're not gonna be able to keep a job. The trainees need to learn, and you know, I want to teach them.
The important part of being a trainee for me was like watching the leadership. It was important that they were homies because watching them, I was able to see that I could do it too, you know what I mean?
What Homeboy does is restore and give hope.
Once upon a time, I was them, and with hard work and dedication, it just let them know that anything's possible.
I'm in awe over what they stand for and their unbelievable commitment for the organization.
People are gonna make mistakes, right? It's good to know that, you know what, the door is never closed. No matter how down you are, there's a door that is always open.
Homeboy Industries was the best thing that's ever happened to me.
It's about the people that need the help, they need the hope, a little bit of love and a little bit of self-respect.
It's changed the way I see the world. The world needs more of Homeboy Industries, you know?
I was supposed to die in prison, and I'm out here. So this is the dream.
They're really good examples of what leadership is all about.
There's no place like Homeboy Industries.
We're willing and we're able. If called upon, we will show.
Loving somebody and caring for somebody without knowing them, it's one of those things, you know, that you're like, wow, this is it. I'm in the right place.
Today, Homeboy Industries is the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and reentry program in the whole world. Father Greg is the author of the 2010 New York Times bestseller, Tattoos on the Heart, The Power of Boundless Compassion, and Barking to the Choir, The Power of Radical Kinship, which he will be signing today after our speaking event, thanks to Desiree Bradley with the San Marco bookstore. My friend Mary Cox, who is here today, told me yesterday that she had given her copy of Tattoos on the Heart to someone years ago and never received it back. I realized it was me to whom she lent the book. So I explained she's actually the reason Father Greg is here today, for it was that book that stirred my wish for all of us to meet him. He is a powerful storyteller, and he is no stranger to colorful language. I've been listening to his most recent book, The Whole Language, on Audible. In this book, he recounts verbatim, raw, and very real conversations that he has had with gang members. My youngest son, writing with me recently, was intent and focused while listening. He looked at me to offer what I was sure to be a wondrous insight of a child. He asked, "Mom, do priests cuss?" Father Greg has been awarded the California Peace Prize, was named the 2014 Champion of Change by President Barack Obama, and in 2017 received the University of Notre Dame's, I had to phonetically, because of none of that, Lettere Medal, which is the oldest honor given to American Catholics. Let me close with a quote Father Greg gave to a media publication just last month. "Cherished people are likely to find their way, and when former gang members experience this at his Homeboy sanctuary, then they take the sanctuary back home to their families, and lives change for good. Through his compassionate kinship, he has changed lives. Indeed, it is through your doing that you have changed the world." So thank you. Please join me in giving Father Greg Boyle, Isaac, and Louie a very warm welcome today.
Hello, everybody. My name is Louie Pam. I'm 43 years old. I've been with Homeboy Industries for going on 3 years now. I was also released from prison in May. Will be 3 years. So a little bit about myself. I was raised with both parents. I have an older sister and a younger brother. So growing up, kind of had that middle child syndrome. So when I was younger, I always felt like I was being treated differently. And growing up, I didn't really understand how to process that. So with that, Just, I didn't understand why I was being treated differently. And every time I acted out, I would get in trouble for it. And all that did was really reinforce that negative, that false narrative that I had created. But it got so bad to the point where I convinced myself that my parents didn't care for me, they didn't love me. So with that, I just kind of carried that up, onto the world. I grew up in a predominantly Mexican and Black neighborhood, so there was very few Asians. I never really felt like I fit in. So I took all that hurt and that pain, and I masked it with anger and violence. And going to school and acting up on that anger and violence, I was praised for it, and it just seemed like it's something I never really got at home. And so when I was praised for it, it was just like, it was a great feeling, and I just want to continue that, fast forward, that type of behavior progressed to the point where I eventually joined a gang. I was in and out of juvenile hall. And then a month after I turned 16, I got arrested for a gang-related murder. I was tried as an adult. I was eventually convicted, and I was sentenced to 26 years to life. Sorry. Shortly after I turned 17, I found myself in state prison. I was probably like the youngest on the yard I was at. So, anyways, I ended up being in prison for 24 years, and thank God I was given a second chance. Today I'm with Homeboy Industries, and I'm living that dream. I can't even begin to explain how much Father G means to me and so many of us. It has been difficult since being home. Like I said, I got arrested shortly after I turned 16, so I never had a driver's license. Meaning that I never had a job, and being in the Homeboy Industries has just been so conducive to my transition. Especially during COVID, there were times where even after everything I've been through, that I still struggle with my addiction to gang and criminal lifestyle. But being at Homeboys and having them, having their love and support, it's just so comforting, I just kind of end that there. If you guys have more questions there, we're a little pressed on time. My name is Isaac Gonzalez, and first of all, thank you for having us here. It's a pleasure and honor to be amongst us. So, I was born and raised in East Los Angeles, and as far as I can remember, my parents were divorced. I had brothers. I had my grandparents in my life. I lived with my grandparents, and my mother raised me, and my father was still alive. So I had two homes. I had my parents in East Los Angeles, was hanging out there. Shortly, with the introduction to the gang culture, my life changed dramatically. My two older brothers, they were recruited into the local gang, and they were real busy in the neighborhood. Thereafter, both of them for different charges. They were both facing life sentences, and me, the baby brother, had to grow pretty fast. So I was scared. I was had a lot of anger, and I just didn't know how to deal with it. So just like my older brothers, I too joined the gang. And as time went on, the streets became my therapy. You know, I've been out there and just like saying, you know, hurt people, and I was one of them, you know. And just like my brothers, I too ended up in prison, you know, but prior to going to prison, at 16, I became a father, thinking I knew everything about it. I didn't know nothing, I didn't know how to raise a child. You know, so I too left my son out by himself. So, unlike Louis, I didn't do a life sentence. My term was more in the installment plan, a labeling plan, you know, I was in and out, you know, and so that's the narrative of my life, you know, in and out, parole from prison with $200 and thinking something was going to be different. And I went to the Homeboys and my homies, they gave me support and it wasn't positive support, so I ended back up in prison. You know, my life started, one of my most painful lessons in my life was while I was in prison. My older brother, Stephen, was murdered in my neighborhood. And that opened up my eyes to a lot. You know, it destroyed my family. You know, and never in my life I thought I would be homeless. I got off to nothing. My family just fell apart, you know, man. But I kept on, you know, like something always told me God had a plan for me. I just needed to find a purpose. So I met my wife. My wife, she supported me in so many ways. She always believed in me. You know, while I was in prison, you know, she would always, I would request books. I would, my older brother would tell me, read, educate yourself. So I'm like, I don't want to be like my brother. I want to read and educate. So I would request his books. And these books began to speak to me. You know, there's a book, As a Man by James Allen. You know, that book changed my life. You know, I've seen these stories in that book, and one day it's going to be me. You know, and in prison, I wanted to go to school, but I didn't qualify for it. I didn't have enough time, or to my writing history, I didn't qualify for certain programs. But fortunately, I qualified for a program called the Instant Reentry Program, so I was allowed to finish my time in the community with the ankle on my ankle. Now, while at this program, I began to see homies that would come in with these Homeboy t-shirts. And I would ask them questions, like, hey, what's that, you know? And so they would tell me. And just something told me that if I would go to Homeboys, I would get the help that I needed, because I needed the help so desperately. I needed to learn how to live. I needed to learn everything, you know, just go back, you know? And I ended up going to Homeboy Industries. I applied for the 18-month program, and my life changed dramatically. You know, as a kid, I always had these dreams, and I would share them with people that they would act, no, you're not going to do that. That's impossible. You know, but something, while I was in prison, I had a vision. And when I went to Homeboys, I was like, man, how am I going to accomplish or fulfill the vision that I have? You know, how can this Chicano from East LA do that? Just gangbang or drug addict. Well, Homeboy Industries gave me the platform to do so. And I've been there, and all I can say is now, my life is amazing. I love it. The work that we do today, it's so fulfilling, it's so rewarding. I'm just glad to be here. Thank you.
Don't hurt yourself on those orange chairs. Anyway, it's a privilege to be all of you patient. It's the privilege of my life to build these two gentlemen and thousands like them. We've had a good time. We were in DC and a bunch of meetings and talks, and so the day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I'm closer to God. Gentlemen, it's been a great grace to deepen our friendship over this time. You know, I've been expert on nothing but for, you know, almost 40 years I've been working with gang members. And they've taught me everything, you know, value. I remember there was a guy named Louis Bettis who, you know, worked there, and he was a homie like these guys, you know, had been to prison, shot caller, who was a heroin addict, and he was in recovery, and then he was kind of running the place. He was, you know, kind of directing the things for almost 10 years, and he was a speaker, and he liked speaking, and he was kind of been happy in that role. And once we went out to dinner and he was giving me tips on how to speak publicly, and he said, you know, you gotta pepper your talk with self-deprecating humor. And I said, yeah, no shit. So people have heard me speak sometimes, you know, and it happens that YouTube is the bane of my existence. I were talking earlier about Orange on this whatever show or something. And once I went to a foster grandparent gathering, and I had spoken there the summer before, and I don't know why they invited me back. The very next summer with the same foster grandparents in the audience, a big, huge gathering in Orange County. And so I went, and after the talk, this woman, a grandmother, came up to me, and I think she liked the talk. She had big tears in her eyes, and she grabbed my hands and she said, I heard you last year. It never gets better. I know she just over there. Anyway, that's just all self-defecating humor. So there's a vision really that joins us, you know, and we're all kind of from different places, prosecutors, public defenders, community activists, law enforcement. It really is the same vision. I think we get to the sense like there's different visions, but there really aren't. It's all how do we somehow create a community of kinship such that God might recognize. We're all on the same page, I think, when it comes to that. So Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? How do we, together in our different particularities, imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle? How do we choose together in our own ways to dismantle the barriers that exclude? And to that end, in our own particular way, we find ourselves out at the margins because it's the only way they get erased is if we stand out at them. And we stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. And we stand with those whose dignity has been denied and those whose burdens are more than they can bear. And every once in a while, wow, you get to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. What a privilege. And you get to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. No kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No kinship, no equality, no matter how singular the focus you may well be on those very worthy goals. The action can't happen unless there's some undergirding sense that we belong to each other. And so you stand at the margins and everybody knows to brace yourselves because people will accuse you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, for in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. And so you inch your way out there and suddenly other voices get heard. So Homeboy Industries was started a long time ago, as Melissa mentioned, when I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles, nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. Together, combined, they comprise the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. So we had 8 gangs at war with each other, which is unheard of in public housing. Usually you have kind of one that dominates. So we had 8. And so I buried my first young person in that community in 1988, and I buried my 255th gang member killed in our streets for no reason whatsoever. Not all from that community, of course, but I run a large gang prevention program. I get asked to do this. So we started to do things. We started school, which was our first thing, because there were so many junior high age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them. So they were wreaking havoc in the middle of the day. You know, they were riding on walls and selling drugs. They were violent. So I walked out to them and I would kind of corner them, isolate them a little, and say, hey, you know, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, every single one said, yeah, you know, I would. And then I, you know, couldn't find a school that would take them. So it kind of forced my hand. And so across the street from the church is the elementary school. And our parochial school grades K to 8 that occupied the first 2 floors. Well, then the entire 3rd floor was the convent. And so one evening I gathered all the nuns in the living room. I sat them down and I said, hey, you know, would you guys mind, you know, moving out and we could turn the convent into a school for gang members? And I remember they looked at each other and kind of went, sure. That was the entirety of their discernment process. And so gang members came in really large numbers from these rival gangs to our school on the 3rd floor of our school. And it was a tough school, you know, I mean, you know, we had teachers that would last a week. Once I had a principal, lasted exactly a day. You know, I called him the next day and he changed his number and checked into a witness protection. And it created a disconnect in the community because parishioners would sidle up to me and say, hey, you know, our church is supposed to be hermetically sealed, you know, good people in and bad people out, you know, which was a good gospel challenge. And then the gang members started to say, well, we had jobs, and so myself and the women in the parish, and the women with children was sort of the profile of folks who lived through the project. So we marched around the factories that surrounded the housing projects, trying to find felony-friendly employers, and it wasn't so forthcoming. So we started things. We started a maintenance crew, a landscaping crew, a graffiti removal crew, a crew to build our child care center on our church property, all made up of rival enemy gang members from the 8 gangs. In 1992, after the Rodney King verdict where the officers were acquitted, every pocket of poverty ignited in Los Angeles except Forest Pocket, my parish. And so the LA Times wanted to know why that was. And so I said, well, I don't know, maybe it's because we had 60 strategically hired rival enemy gang members who had a reason to get up in the morning, and a reason not to gangbang the night before, and a reason, more to the point of your question, not to torch their own community. So the article appears, and then I get a phone call from the office of Ray Stark, who was a movie producer in Hollywood, summoned to his Beverly Hills office. He happened to have $500 million. And he said, how should I spend my money? And I can see now, you know, I woefully undershot my request. So I had here, and I said, well, there's an abandoned bakery across the street from the school. You can buy it. It has ovens, they don't work, but you can fix them. We can put hairnets on rival gang members that can bake bread. We could call it Homeboy Bakery. That was literally in a 5-minute space, the entirety of my business plan. And he said, sure. So we were off and running. And a month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market, which is kind of the historic center of Los Angeles. Once we had plural, we changed our name. We had called ourselves Jobs for a Future. We changed it to Homeboy Industries, as if, you know, there was any industry involved in this project. And not everything worked, you know, I mean, first to admit it, Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. And then you back your way, you evolve your way, nobody ever saw this coming, much less myself, and now we're the largest gang convention, rehabilitation program on the planet. So some 8,000 gang members a year walk through our doors. They all want to get into the 18-month training program where these two guys started. Because it's a paid gig, but in 34 years, we probably changed midstream. At some point, we said, an educated inmate may or may not go back to prison. An employed one may or may not. And then we went, but a healed gang member will not ever reoffend, period. And so we changed who we were. I mean, we had this, because we listened to gang members and they said, if only we had jobs. And that's what we did. Nothing's possible like a job was our motto on our t-shirt. And then that's when we listened. But once you know them, you go, oh, this is about complex trauma. This is about healing. And so the place itself is a place that heals and receives people. Homies will say, you know, we're used to being watched, but we're not used to being seen. And so we try to see them. Any complex, vexing social dilemma like homelessness or mental health issues or gang-involved folks, you always have to begin with a safe place. They walk through our doors and it's safe. And then they are seen. And then they are cherished. And if it's true, as Isaac was saying, you know, the damage the person, you know, is going to cause damage, then it's equal to that a cherished person will be able to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and others. And so we have therapy, we have free tattoo removal, we have case managers as Isaac is, and Louis navigators who help kind of, you know, corral the cats. And we have classes in our management, parenting. Everybody has to be involved in some kind of educational further work. And the place is just a teeming community of the beloved belonging that they've all been yearning for. No kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang. He's always fleeing something. There are no exceptions there. Nobody has ever met a hopeful kid who joined a gang. That's never happened. And gangs are the places kids go when they've encountered their life as a misery, and everybody knows that misery loves company. And there are only 3 profiles of kids who join a gang. There are 4, there are 8, there are only 3. The despondent kid who can't imagine tomorrow, so his present isn't very compelling. The traumatized kid who can't see his way clear to transform his pain, so he keeps transmitting it. And the mentally ill kid. So it's a continuum of severity. Somebody can be more despondent than mentally ill, or more mentally ill than traumatized. But those are the 3 profiles, and there aren't other ones. Once I was in a city in the east that had a pamphlet that the chief of police handed me, and it was one of those pamphlets you hand to parents when their kids are gravitating perilously close to gang involvement. And so I opened it, and running across the whole top of the brochure thing said the #1 reason why kids join gangs. And underneath in bold letters it says excitement. And I thought, wow, if there were 200 reasons, then there aren't. But if there were, excitement would not, I wouldn't include it in that list. But that's a perfect classic example of the outsider view driving the inside of how we see things, driving the inside of our policy, sitting in a room and saying, why did a kid join me? I got it, excitement, put that down. But what if we knew the truth? That what we needed to do as a society was to infuse hope to kids for whom hope is foreign, and to help heal the damage, and to deliver mental health services in a timely and culturally appropriate fashion. Would that work? I think we're all certain of it. But people need to be safe, seen, and cherished in the meantime. And yet, every single gang member who walks through the doors at Homeboy comes barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace, and the only thing that can scale that wall is tenderness. Every single one who walks through those doors comes with what psychologists would call a disorganized attachment. Mom was either frightened or frightening, and you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. And so how do you reach in and dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that have gotten in the way, that keep folks from seeing the truth of who they are, that they're exactly what God had in mind, what God made them, and then they in fact become that truth, they inhabit that truth, and no bullet can pierce it, and no 4 prison walls can keep it out, and death can't touch it because it's huge. But how do you reach in and dismantle such messages? In the Acts of the Apostles, it says, and awe came upon everyone. And it seems to suggest that the measure of health in any community at all may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. So many years ago, I was invited to speak at a gang-in service in Richmond, Virginia, to 600 social workers. And I'd done a lot of these over the years, and they commandeer a hotel ballroom from 9 to 5, and you sign in and you get credits, and so they have keynotes and workshops and breakout sessions. And so I said yes, because I don't know how to say no, and I bought my ticket, and a week before I was to fly, I do this often where I pulled up, what is that thing I'm flying to? And to my horror, I discovered that I am to be the only speaker from 9 to 5 all damn day. As my homies would say, oh hell no. We found 2 unsuspecting trainees, Andre, African-American ganger, and Jose. They were from enemy gangs, which is what I like to do often, and they'd never flown, of course. I sat them in my office, I said, look, at the end of the week, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up in front of 600 social workers and tell your stories. Take your time. That's become a long answer. But I never heard their stories. Jose gets up first, and I guess it's like 25 years old, and he been to prison, shot collar, tattooed. At that juncture, both of them were in their 9th month, in their 18-month time. Jose had become a very valued member of our substance abuse team at Solid in his own recovery. And now he was helping younger homies and homegirls with their addiction issues. And so he had been to prison, was a gang member, but had a long stretch as a homeless man, even longer stretch as a heroin addict. And so he gets up in front of 600 social workers and he says, I guess you could say, well, my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasped. And he says, it sounds way worse in Spanish. seen that before. And then he continued. I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California. And she walks me up to an orphanage and she knocks on the door and the guy comes to the door and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of where she had dumped me. My grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through. Second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the 3rd t-shirt, you couldn't see anyone. Kids at school, they make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of the story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. And so we see people when they walk through our doors. The Buddhists say, oh, nobly born, remember who you really are. The Christmas Carol, it says, long lay the world in sin and error pining till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. And yeah, it's a song about Jesus, and yeah, it's a song about Christmas, but how is it not? In fact, the job description of every human being and proud owner of a pulse to appear and the soul feels its worth. Just to end with a story, that I'm going to bring these guys up here and we're going to answer a few questions because apparently there's wine out there. So there was years ago, I used to ride my bike in the projects at night, and I would patrol various 8 different gangs. This was what I did as a pastor, and it was like, put that Uzi down. You sure you want to shoot that guy? Things like that. And so one night, really late, I was over at Aliso Village and talking to like 8 guys in a darkened archway from this one gang. And I could see over in the parking lot, poorly lit, was this kid named Bandit. We all call him Bandit. He ran too far to sell crack cocaine, which is what they did in those days. And he came and he didn't know how to ride. I wish I could say he was embarrassed that I saw this transaction, but he wasn't so much. And he never stepped foot in Homeboy Industries until he did. And in recovery, in gang recovery is no different. they'll say it takes what it takes, So it can be the birth of a son, the death of a friend, a long stretch in prison. It takes what it takes. And so he walked through the door and I couldn't believe it. Yes, he laughed, but I couldn't believe he was there. And he said what homies always say, I'm tired of being tired. And so he dove into our 18-month program. He did the work. He transformed his pain so he didn't have to inflict it anymore. He did therapy, he got tattoos removed. He got his GED. He worked side by side with people he used to shoot at. He came to terms with what had been done to him and what he had done. And honest to God, if his story had been a flame, you'd have to keep your distance, otherwise you'd get scorched. I would not have survived a single day of his childhood. And then his 18 months were up, and our job developers, we have a bunch of them, found him a job because we want the transition to be seamless. And he got a warehouse job, entry-level job, first kind of job. And now he was a resilient person in the world who was going to throw stuff at him, of course. But this time he wasn't going to be taught. And so he goes to the warehouse, cut to 5 years later, he's, running the warehouse. Many more years later, he's like the supervisor, head guy, and gets married, marries his childhood sweetheart from the projects, has 3 kids, 3 daughters, bought a house. I hadn't heard from him in a long time, and no news is good news, with gamers, but on a Friday afternoon, he calls me kind of with panic in his voice. Gee, you gotta bless my daughter. I said, ¿Qué pasó? She's sick, is she in the hospital? Oh no, on Sunday, my oldest, my Jessica, she's going to Humboldt College. But Humboldt's far, it's way up north, and she's a little chaparrita, more afraid. Could you give her a blessing before she goes? I go, oh my God, I'd be honored. But tomorrow is Saturday, I have baptisms at 1. Why don't you guys come at 12:30? Sure enough, Bandit and his wife, the 3 girls show up, including tiny little Jessica. So we stand in front of the altar, and I said, let's surround Jessica with her bodies and her love. And everybody touch her, put your hand on her head, on her shoulder, grab her on her arm. And so we bow our heads and we close our eyes, and as the homies would say, I do a long ass prayer. And I go on, and somewhere in the middle of this prayer, we've all become chillones, we're all crying. I don't know why, I'm just blubbering. I don't know why we're crying exactly, except for the fact that Bandit and his wife don't know anybody who's ever gone to college except me. Certainly nobody in their families. So, we kind of wipe our eyes and we laugh about how mushy you get, and to change the subject, I look at Jessica, hey, what are you going to study at Humboldt College? And she was very quick, she said, forensic psychology. And Bandit over here trying to say, yeah, she wants to study the criminal mind. And she looks at her father and she goes, one of these, She laughs and says, yeah, I'm going to be her first subject. So we go up to the car in the parking lot, and we go abrazos, everybody miles in, and Bandit hangs back. I'm glad he asked. And I said, hey, can I tell you something? I give you credit for the man you've chosen to become, choosing to walk in your own footsteps. I'm proud of you. And his eyes fill up with tears, and so do mine. And he says, ¿Sabes qué? I'm proud of myself. All my life, people called me a lowlife. But when about another, good for nothing. I guess I showed him. Said, yeah, I guess you did. And the soul feels its worth. Born of tenderness and a community of belonging that cherishes, so that people can know the truth of who they are, was nobly born. Remember who you really are till you appear, and the soul feels its worth. And then, I don't know, we all cease to care whether anybody accuses us of wasting our time as we stand at the margins. For in this place in which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, voices of those who say, thank you. So we'll do like this, and also like that, and then I'll put these guys in. Whoever's supposed to. Seriously, it won't take long. Yes, ma'am.
I'm a pediatrician, and I see a lot of despondent, traumatized, and probably mentally ill teenagers. And if you had been in a pediatrician's office, what would you want me to say? What would you want me to direct?
Yeah, you know, I think everybody, I would presume, is familiar with the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And so once you kind of have a reference for how complex people are, because, for years we've, obviously this is like we've been punishing wound rather than healing it, which is crazy. But we've been doing it, forever. And so how are you going to keep them down on the farm, once they know the ACEs study, So talk to me about, I know grace, but talk to me about sin once you know the ACEs study, seriously. And we do this thing, well, these guys had a choice. Well, not all choices are created equal. And the ACEs study is real. I mean, I grew up with a gang capital of the world, and I'm a 0 on the ACEs. 0. That doesn't make me morally superior to these two gentlemen. Quite the opposite, right? That's white privilege, and won all the lotteries, and zip code, and education, and parents. Total luck. 0 to do with morality, and I'm a priest. So I think that's important to talk about. They say there are 4 or 5 of these. Chances are you're going to have health issues and socializing difficulties if you're a 4 or 5. I would say that every man and woman who walks through the doors of Homeboy Industries is a 9 or a 10, which should lead us to a place of awe at what folks have to carry rather than judgment at how they carry. So once you can start there, then you can really have alternatives to incarceration. The largest mental institution on the planet Earth is Los Angeles County Jail. That should indicate kind of how we've gone off the tracks. It's not too late. Systems change when people do. And people change when they are cherished. And if our starting point is everybody is unshakably good, no exceptions, and we belong to each other, no exceptions, then we have a shot at this. But the minute we think it's about good people and bad people, oh my gosh, seriously? I've never been a bad person, and I run the largest gang intervention program on the planet, never. I've met despondent people. I've met the most egregiously traumatized people. And I've met mentally ill people, but I've never met anybody bad. And that's not making me some naive Father Flanagan. You can, the poet Wallace Stevens says, we live in the description of the place and not the place itself. We settle for the description of the place when we should hold out for the place itself. What John Lewis says, we all live in the same house. There are no qualifiers. One day we may live in this. No. Some of us live on the third floor, some of us live in the basement. No. We all live in the same house. If that's where we start, then we'll heal wound rather than punish. And we will infuse hope, heal trauma, deliver mental health services. Yeah.
And I have a question for you. So I just wanted to ask, what were some of the effects of being prosecuted as an adult, as a juvenile? And what services or organizations do you think may have potentially been put in place that could have helped you change that narrative about you that you had about yourself that made you there?
I think so the first thing I think about is Homeboy Industries. And I'm an art navigator, slash mentor there, and I work with the youth. And so like growing up, I kind of lacked like a role model. Not only a role model, but like a mentor. Like I had anybody to really talk to. So because I work closely with them, I look for those certain signs, I guess you could say. And on the side, I'll make sure I make the effort to kind of help them explore that. I try to pull it out, because when you're younger, it's just like you don't want to talk about it. It's really funny. You have a big like distrust for others. So maybe starting in schools, counselors, teachers, just being very aware of these warning signs. I don't know if all that answers your question.
I would like to take the scene. So, looking back at my life, right, as I mentioned earlier, I had 2 older brothers. They were incarcerated at a very young age, both were facing life sentences. And again, the strain that it put on my family, when I found myself in prison, I was like, man, when did I back? Of course, I lacked parents, I lacked support, I lacked my brothers, but why was all that taken from me? My family was focused on my brothers. I was the child that was, I say, that was lost in the shadows. I had to fend for myself, I had to grow up. And now I look at my parents, and for all the trauma and everything that's gone on, I'm like, man, no wonder they lost the marbles. Where was the support for my family? What therapies did they have? And that's what I think that's the last. It's not just the child that's going through it, but the whole family, and the whole wraparound service for the entire family. I think that would make a big difference. Thank you.
Let me just answer that real quick. No, I totally agree. So parenting would be like number one. Like a lot of that could have been prevented, like had the parent really pay attention to, like the fight for help. Every time I was acting up or throwing tantrums, like it was a fight for help. And for a parent, they're able to tap in and say, hey, what is it that, because even we don't understand at that age. We're just acting up. So as soon as they raise their voice, and we're just like hurt by it, just throw a tantrum. And we just carry that with us, like, it's an adult. So I just want to add that.
Maybe just one more, right? Yeah, one more question. Yeah, back there.
What? Because I work in social enterprise too, and we work with the most amazing people. what practically has like flowed into the criminal justice system from the work at Homeboys? Like, has anything practically changed? Like, still, I see the attitude is punishment. What have you seen change in your city practically in the justice department?
Yeah, I mean, we'll just close with this. I feel like, you know, you don't go to the margins to make a difference, first of all. You go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different. And then it's eternally replenishing, and you never burn out, because it's not about you. People who burn out have been doing it incorrectly, and they allowed it to become about them. And so that's just to say everything is about, it's a long haul. So, you know, I remember when Homeboy Industries was, you know, in the early days, 10 years probably, bomb threats, death threats, and hate mail. Never from gang members, because we were always a symbol of hope, gang members. But you know, like all our anonymous letters were from law enforcement. We would say, we hate you, I'm a sheriff, or I'm a cop. We hate you, you're part of the problem. Well, that was like, you know, a long time ago. You know, hard to retrieve those memories of that, you know, because it was really a long time ago. So, and then we had Daryl Gates was the chief of police, Operation Hammer, round them up, all these kinds of draconian measures. And it would be inconceivable for that to happen now. And so, you know, for anybody who says, you know, well, we haven't really made progress, well, that is Barack Obama would often say, then you're not paying attention. Of course we have. Well, of course we have. It's, the situation in Los Angeles today is unrecognizable from the early lawful days. Often, excessive use of force. I was naive because I grew up in a part of the city where the cop was your friend and took a cat out of the tree. But I was naive about that because that was not the experience of people in the community. And that's changed. Now it is more relational than it's ever been. So it kind of moved from, you know, kind of get tough to community policing, which basically was, we want the community to tell us who committed that crime, frankly. And then it became relational policing, which is really progress. And so all that stuff happened. So where Homeboy now is kind of embraced in a way in the county of Los Angeles, you know, in a way that would have been inconceivable 34 years ago. So all that progress has happened, you know. So in our county, they've just decided not to rebuild men's central jail, which is huge, you know, and a huge decision. And instead, we're in the process of designing a thing called Hope Village, which will maybe address all the things that we need to in terms of mental health and job training and kind of access to opportunities. So I don't know. But if you're in it for a long haul, you can find your hope. You may not always be optimistic, but you can certainly be anchored in hope, because Mother Teresa says we're not called to be successful, we're called to be faithful. So then you're faithful to an approach that you believe in. If love is the answer, community is the context, and tenderness is the methodology, it's the connective tissue. And so, yeah, we live in the description of the place, but we actually can hold out for the places. Thank you, there's wine.